Alright, hi everyone. I hope you guys are having a great day. So during this lecture video, we are going to finish up the first set of slides. We are also going to briefly start the second set of slides on prenatal development, although we will finish up the rest of that material during the next lecture video. Also, during this video, we will discuss your first activity. So remember that activity 1 is going to be going on this week. It's going to close on Friday at 5 p.m. So make sure that you submit that activity. Let me know if you have questions as you're working on it. Remember that activities need to be at least 200 words long to receive full credit. We'll talk about the topic for the activity during the video, and you'll see that also in Canvas when you go in to complete the activity. I do recommend that you type up that activity in something like Microsoft Word, where you can have a word count, and then from there you can copy and paste your final answer into Canvas. Please keep in mind, though, that I'm looking for your thoughts and your opinions. I am not looking for you to use outside sources, but if you do use sources, you need to cite those appropriately. All right? So let me know if you have any questions about that. Let's go ahead and get into the material for today. So we're going to be talking, first of all, about some theories. We described theories at the end of our last lecture video. We said that a theory is kind of a big picture idea that allows us to make sense of information, and that something is not necessarily true just because it's a theory, but it's an idea, and we want to test our theories by doing research studies. So later in the set of slides, we are going to introduce a little bit of information about research. But before we do that, we are going to talk about a few developmental theories. So we're going to be talking about some names that you may have heard of before, some names you may not have heard of. These are theories that will come back up throughout the class. So as we go through different stages, so for example, when we talk about early childhood, we'll say, well, this might have been what Freud had to say about early childhood, or this is what Vygotsky might have said, or Piaget might have said here. So this information will come back up as we go through different stages of life. What you need to know is that these are just theories, not necessarily proven, but they're ideas that help guide research and help give us some way of making sense of the information that we see. So, first of all, Freud, if you were to ask someone, who do you think of when you think of psychology, Freud is very often the name that comes to mind. I am a little bit biased here in my perception of Freud, perhaps. I do make the joke that Freud is like the drunk uncle at Thanksgiving. We have to invite him, but you never know what he's going to say, and he's high most of the time, right? So this is Freud. All right, however, I have to give credit where credit is due. Freud did kind of get the ball rolling, get a lot of people interested in psychology. He has written a lot, published a lot. There's definitely some interest in some of the things that Freud had to say. But one of the critiques of Freud is that a lot of what he had to say doesn't really go well with research. It's very difficult to research some of the things that Freud suggested, unconscious things, defense mechanisms, things that we can't really address or look for or see directly, which then, of course, makes it a lot harder to do research. But, all right, so let's get into Freud's theory. Freud's theory on development is that your development is impacted a lot during the earliest part of your life. So kids are kind of set by an early age, and it's impacted a lot by parenting that you received. Freud gets a lot of criticism, though, because some of his ideas are a little bit out there. Certainly things like sex and aggression play very large parts in Freud's theory, as you'll see. But Freud suggested that we have 3 main parts to our personality, and they develop in the order in which you see them on the slide. So the id develops first. The id is completely unconscious, so you're not aware of the id. According to Freud, it would be present at birth, the only part of the personality that is present at birth, and the id is focused only on meeting its own needs. So you can see this with very young children. They're focused on themselves and not on other people. So the id is all about getting what it wants and doesn't really have any idea or understanding of doing things for other people or what society thinks is okay. It's all about getting what it wants. And according to Freud, this is the majority of our personality. So whether or not you realize that you have all of this anger and this aggression and these sexual drives that are unconscious, so you don't realize them, which of course makes it hard to research them, but it's going to impact you even if you're not aware of them. And then according to Freud, the ego starts to develop later in life, you start to have this conscious part of your personality, or this rational part of your personality, that understands that, yes, we need to get our needs met, but we can't just get our needs met by demanding what we want and not considering other people. We have to have a rational plan for how to get our needs met. So it's going to emerge later. It's going to redirect those id impulses. We're still going to try to meet our needs, but we're going to try to meet them in a way that is acceptable to the people around us. So the ego is kind of the executive. It's the part of the personality that's in charge. And then the last part of the personality to develop, according to Freud, would be your superego. Your superego is your conscience. So this is where morality comes from. It's the last part to develop. According to Freud, would develop around 3 to 6. And what happens is you have morality internalized from society, from caregivers, from religious beliefs perhaps. And so you learn what is okay and what's not okay. So on the one hand, you have the id saying, get what you want. It doesn't matter who you hurt. Do what you have to do to get what you want. On the other hand, you have the superego saying, you need to not hurt other people. You need to do what's right for other people. You need to do what is morally acceptable. So the id only thinks about itself. The superego only thinks about other people. And then the ego has to try to balance those out. And then psychodynamic, psychoanalytic theory, which is how we would describe Freud's theories, would say that psychological problems happen when the ego is not able to appropriately balance the needs of the id and the superego. Now, specifically with development here, Freud suggested that people develop through stages, and that's not something that's unique to Freud. A lot of theorists thought that we go through stages. So if we're talking about a discontinuous way of thinking about development here. So you're in a stage and you stay where you are until you're ready to jump up and move up to that next stage. Freud would suggest that we go through these psychosexual stages. And once again, as I mentioned, Freud, a little bit controversial, had a lot of sexuality and aggression in his theories. But Freud would suggest that we go through these stages, we go through them in order, and there are specific age ranges. So the oral stage would last from about birth to 1, somewhere in there. And the emphasis in the oral stage, kids get their needs met through their mouth. So you can see this, that kids, like as soon as you give them something during the stage 0 to 1, they put it in their mouth. They use their mouth to explore the environment. Now, part of that may be that this is just where they are developmentally. Part of this is also teething, to be honest. I don't know how much emphasis Freud put on teething, but that is also something important to keep in mind. And then, after the oral stage, you would move on to the anal stage. During the anal stage, this is where potty training is happening. This is somewhere from around 1-ish to 3. And so then children are primarily, during the stage, focusing on potty training, learning how to control themselves, not have accidents, that kind of thing. And then, according to Freud, you move on from about age 3 to 6, we move into the phallic stage. According to Freud, this is when children realize that they have genitals and when children start to have sexual desires. According to Freud, I understand this sounds very strange. So then Freud would also say that during the phallic stage, this is when children might start to have Oedipus complex or an Electra complex. Prepare yourselves if you're not familiar with those terms, but the idea is that children might potentially have sexual desires for their opposite sex parent. Yeah, I know. Let that sink in. And so then because they realize it's not appropriate for them to have those desires, then they kind of repress those, which is why they're not aware of them. Of course, it's hard to do research on things that are repressed and we're not aware of, but that's a whole nother conversation. And I think you're starting to get how I feel about Freud. And then 6 to puberty, which can happen, of course, at different times for different people, would be considered a period of latency where sexual desires kind of take a back seat during a time of kids are going to school, learning a lot of new things. And then, of course, once you hit puberty, pretty much from puberty to the rest of your life, Freud would call that the genital stage, when sexuality is a very important part of who you are. And then, of course, Freud would suggest that you can have problems come up at any point, one of these stages, like you can have a fixation develop. Freud might say if your mother doesn't feed you often enough or feeds you too much, you can develop an oral fixation. Or if you had potty training problems, you can develop an anal fixation, that kind of thing. Now, once again, just a theory. If we talk about other theories that are going to come up a little bit more during the class, Erikson's theories are going to be a little bit more common in our discussions later in the semester. Erikson's psychosocial theory is going to go through stages, like Freud went through stages. And during the stage, you're going to have basically a crisis, or you're going to have a challenge that you're faced with. So Erikson would say that there's a most important thing going on during each time period, and if you're able to successfully navigate that time period, then you're able to gain resiliency that you carry with you on into the future stages. If you struggle in a particular stage, then you might carry that on with you, and it can kind of sabotage you, set you up for failure in later stages. So some of this can make sense. We see that during birth to 1 year, that first stage, trust versus mistrust. So of course, everything that a child receives during that first year comes from a caregiver, and so you're learning whether or not you can trust caregivers, the world in general. And then you see things like autonomy versus shame, kids learning how to be independent, initiative versus guilt. So we see kids starting to maybe spend more time around peers, learning how to try new things. Industry versus inferiority. So this is maybe when kids are first going to school, and then during that time period they're starting to compare themselves with their classmates. Am I as good or better than my classmates, or are there certain areas that I'm struggling in? During adolescence, you see identity issues here, which I think we can all relate to, trying to figure out who you are, who you want to be. Young adulthood, probably most of you taking this class would consider yourselves in this young adulthood period. Erikson would say that being able to develop intimate relationships is especially important during this time period, not just romantic relationships, but intimacy in general. And then as you get older, generativity versus stagnation, so thinking about spending your life in a way that matters, so contributing to other people, whether that be your children or potentially people in the community, volunteering, that kind of thing. And then later in life, integrity versus despair, looking back on your life and reviewing it and wondering, am I happy with the way things went? And then I can perhaps, pass on with peace, or do I despair that I've run out of time and didn't accomplish all the things that I wanted to accomplish? So we're going to come back to Erikson's theory. Today we're just doing a brief overview, but as we go through different stages and we talk about that in more detail, Erikson's theory will come back up. Alright, now another theory that's going to be important for the class is going to refer to behaviorism. So behaviorism, or this information could also be thought of as behavior modification or learning. This suggests that we develop into the person we are today because of our environment, because of primarily operant conditioning and the consequences of our behaviors. Very simple idea here. When you do something and it goes well for you, you're more likely to do that behavior again in the future. If you do something and it does not go well for you, you're less likely to do that behavior again in the future. So a consequence that leads to the behavior being more likely is a reinforcement. A consequence that leads to a behavior being less likely would be a punishment. Now I say more likely or less likely because just because a behavior is reinforced doesn't guarantee that it will happen again, and just because a behavior is punished does not guarantee that it won't happen again, but it makes it more or less likely. You'll also see the terms positive or negative here. Positive and negative does not refer to good or bad. It's talking about adding or taking away. So positive reinforcement is adding something desirable to increase a behavior or make it more likely. So examples of positive reinforcement, if your child does their chores, you give them praise. If a student does well on a test, maybe you give them extra credit, or maybe homework, you don't have to do your homework today. That could be negative reinforcement. So negative reinforcement involves taking something away to increase a behavior. So saying you did well on a test, so now you don't have to do your homework, that's a negative reinforcement. Because I'm taking away something undesirable that makes that behavior more likely to happen again in the future. Another example of negative reinforcement would be taking medicine for a headache. So if you have a headache, and you take Tylenol, Tylenol takes away something undesirable, the headache, which will then make you more likely to take Tylenol again in the future when you have a headache. So positive reinforcement means you're adding something to increase the behavior. Negative reinforcement means you're taking something away to increase the behavior. Punishment is intended to decrease the behavior. So a positive punishment means you're adding something to decrease the behavior. So you could add pain, you can add shame, you can add extra chores. So I might say, because my children were fighting, then they have to go clean their rooms. Or because they didn't pick up their toys, now they have to go do extra homework, that kind of thing. You are adding something unpleasant to try to decrease the behavior. Negative punishment means you're taking something away to decrease the behavior. So this would be saying, because of your behavior, whatever it is that we want to decrease, we're going to do a negative punishment, so I'm going to take away attention. I'm going to take away TV time. So time out would be negative punishment. You're removing someone from all stimulation and putting them in basically a boring environment. Jail would be another example. There may be some positive punishment aspects of jail, but the idea behind jail is negative punishment, taking away your freedom. If somebody gives you a parking ticket, that's really a negative punishment because they're taking away your money. So with positive punishment, you add something unpleasant. With negative punishment, you take away something pleasant. So the theory here is that you are who you are today because certain behaviors worked out well for you and were reinforced. Certain behaviors did not work out well for you and were punished. There'll be plenty more on behavioral viewpoints later. Now, something that is related to a behavioral viewpoint, but also has a social aspect to it, social learning theory. So this is learning. Perhaps we could consider this related to behavior modification because you're watching how well a behavior works out for someone else. You're not receiving necessarily the consequences yourself, but you're just imitating other people. A lot of what we do comes from looking for role models in our life and imitating their behavior. So we learn by watching others. We speak the language that is spoken to us. We use the same kinds of gestures. We dress in similar ways. We learn from watching other people. We know this. Now, who do we usually imitate? We usually imitate people that we look up to. So a child might imitate a parent, or they might also imitate their peers. They might imitate teachers or other role models that they spend time around. Usually we imitate people that we see as smart, popular, or talented. We want to be like that person, so we imitate them. You hear maybe perhaps the expression that imitation is the highest form of flattery, right? So also, as I said, there is a behaviorism component here because we're more likely to imitate behaviors when we see someone being reinforced for them. So if we, for example, see a sibling do their chores and get a special reward for that, then maybe we say, well, I'm going to do my chores now because I want to get my special reward too. So we usually imitate behaviors that work well for the person. Now, self-efficacy refers to our confidence about our abilities, and we can also learn this from the people that we spend time around. So what we see is that sometimes if you have a parent or a caregiver that is confident about their abilities, that might help the child start to feel more confident too. But if you have a caregiver that is constantly saying negative things about themselves and putting themselves down, then the child can learn that behavior too. So the way that we think about ourselves is also, at least partially, modeled from seeing how other people feel about themselves. All right. We're also going to talk about several cognitive theories of development. Piaget in particular is going to come back up as we go through different stages, and you'll see a summary of Piaget's theory coming up. Piaget, once again, had a theory that's going to involve discontinuous development, so those discrete stages, the idea that we are in a stage and we stay at about the same level until we're ready to move to that next stage, and then we jump up and move on to the next stage, and then we stay the same until we're ready to jump up to the next stage. So Freud had stages. Vygotsky is going to have something that's somewhat similar, at least in theory. We'll come back to that in a second. But Piaget definitely has stages. Erikson has stages. We're going to come back to that later. Vygotsky would say that you are in certain stages of cognitive development, but he didn't have necessarily specific stages we're going to look at. Rather, he had kind of a general theory that we're going to learn based on where we are right now. We learn by learning from someone who has more experience, someone who has an ability that we don't have yet. So he had this idea of apprenticeship. Also, you're going to see, when we talk more about Vygotsky later, he had this zone of proximal development. And the idea that you learn best when you're around people who can help you with the skill that you're working on. So if we focus on a skill that we already know how to do, then we're bored and we're wasting our time. If we focus on a skill that is so hard that we can't do it even with help, then we're going to be wasting our time and we're going to be stressed out and anxious. So the best thing to do is to focus on that next skill, that next stage where we're not quite there yet, but almost there, and we have someone that's a little bit ahead of us that can help us. This could be a teacher, it could be a parent, it could be potentially a classmate, if you have a classmate that's a little bit ahead of you, or maybe an older sibling, that kind of thing. But someone who already knows how to do a task can help you. And so we learn best when we're kept in our zone of proximal development, when we're working at tasks that are the appropriate level of difficulty. We're also going to talk later about an information processing theory. This is generally thinking of humans as being similar to computers. So you have an input, you store information, then you retrieve that information and you do something with it so you can manipulate it similar to the way that a computer does. Of course, we're not necessarily as efficient as computers, but we become more efficient as we get older because we learn new strategies for processing information. All right. So as I said, Piaget has very discrete specific stages based on age. So Piaget's 4 stages of cognitive development, so we have sensory motor, which is birth to 2 years. So during this stage, infants are learning motor skills. So that's the part of the sensory motor. And so they're learning how to navigate their world with their new motor skills. So thinking about the toys that we give kids during this stage, they like to play with toys that make noise or toys that light up, because they're learning a connection between their movements and then being able to produce sensory experiences like noises or something that they can see because of their movements. That's about all the cognitive development Piaget would say we have going on. There's a little more going on there. We'll talk more when we get into the infancy slides. But then from birth to 6 years, we have a lot going on during this time period. Piaget would call this the pre-operational stage. So during this stage, children are starting to learn the basics of being able to think logically. But of course, you're still going to have a lot of errors in reasoning here. I'm not sure if you ever tried to win an argument with a 3-year-old, but it's pretty challenging to do. So we have a lot of errors in our logic here, but we're starting to think logically. And then as you move into concrete operational stage, this is where you are able to think logically as long as it's something that you can manipulate, as long as it's something tangible that you can actually touch. You can solve a problem that's right in front of you. And so Piaget would say that 7 says to early adolescence here. And then from formal operational period would be adolescence through the rest of your life. The idea that you become able to solve problems even if they're not directly in front of you. You're able to think logically about things even if they're not necessarily tangible, so it's more abstract ideas. A lot more detail on Piaget later, just an introduction today. Now, as I said, Vygotsky is going to focus on apprenticeship. So his theory focuses on a sociocultural influence, so you're learning from the people around you. So there's a very big emphasis on nurture here. You're going to learn how to perform the tasks that the people around you are performing, and you're going to learn that by hands-on help. And so you need someone who is a little bit more advanced than you to be able to help you. So it talks about focusing on how adults, not necessarily just parents, but could be grandparents, aunts, uncles, teachers, mentors, people in the community, convey aspects of culture to children. So we pass on the information that we have, but of course, as I said, we have to keep in mind the zone of proximal development and make sure that we're passing on information that the child is capable of learning with help. Not something that's too easy that we already know, and not something that's so hard that we can't learn it with help. But eventually we will start to be able to master where we are right now on our own. And at that point, you just move up to a more difficult task. So it's focusing on where that child is right now. This is challenging if we're thinking about our current way of thinking of education, where we have children grouped based on age. In a 3rd grade classroom, you're likely to have students that are in very different zones of proximal development. Some will still need some extra assistance with reading. Some might need extra assistance with math. Some might be ahead, and so their zone of proximal development, where they need your help, would actually be more difficult tasks. So very challenging to try to keep a room full of students in the same work when they have different zones of proximal development. But basically viewing development as an apprenticeship, you're learning from someone who is a little bit more advanced, and they're able to help you accomplish tasks. All right. Bronfenbrenner, another theory here on how we develop, and it talks about this as an ecological approach. So the thing that I like about Bronfenbrenner is that his theory includes components of your nurture that other theories might not consider. So if I ask you who has been most influential in your life, you'll probably say my parents, maybe your siblings or teachers. You think about the people who are closest to you. But Bronfenbrenner would say that we have layers to our nurture, to our environment. And so it's like an onion, right? We have several different layers and we peel it back and it gets more and more complicated, maybe more than we could see initially. Because Bronfenbrenner would say that you are kind of engulfed in several different layers of your culture at one time that you might not even be aware of. So here you are in the middle, and there's a graph here, and there's a picture you can see. I'll go back to that previous slide in just a second. But here you are in the middle. You're in the middle, and then all of these different systems impact you. But as you move further out, they get a little bit further away from you, and they're a little bit less under your control. So you're in the middle, and then right around you, you have your microsystem. Your microsystem would refer to the people and the objects, the things that are closest to you. Your microsystem is made up of the people that you interact with on a daily basis. Now, your microsystem would look different from other people's microsystems. For example, if you grew up in a home with two parents and both your parents were involved, then you would have, both your parents would be part of your microsystem. But some people might grow up in a home where they only had one parent, or maybe they didn't grow up with their parents, maybe they grew up with grandparents or others. So their microsystem would not involve their parents. So it's the people that you spend the most time around on a day-to-day basis. That's your microsystem. And of course, they're impacting you directly. And then as you move out, we're going to have other people and things that are still impacting us, but maybe not impacting us directly and maybe not impacting us on a daily environment. So here we are in the middle. Our microsystem would be the people we spend the most time around. It lists parents here. That's often parents, but not always parents, but could be peers, could be teachers, the school system. And then the mesosystem is going to refer to the interactions between microsystems. So if your parents and your friends are both aspects of your microsystem, then your mesosystem would be the relationship between your parents and your friends. If your parents and your teacher are both parts of your microsystem because you interact with them on a daily basis, then the relationship between your parents and your teacher would be your mesosystem. So it's that relationship between your microsystems, and that's very important for the person. So, for example, you can have a good relationship with your friends and a good relationship with your parents. But if your parents don't have a good relationship with your friends, that makes things difficult. Can we go spend time at our friend's house? Can our friends come over to our house? So this is taking into account not just the relationships you have with the people that are important to you, but the relationships that they have with each other and how that's important. And then the next layer out would be the exosystem. So you'll see the exosystem here. These are things that still impact you, but they're things that you don't have much control over. So it talks things like your parents' social network here. So your parents' friends, your parents' coworkers, they can still impact you. Your parents' boss can impact your day because they impact your parent, even if they're not impacting you directly. It also talks about government and social policies here. So laws can impact you even if you don't have much control over them. The media would be another example here. The media is influential even if it's something that the person doesn't have much control over. It talks about parents' places of employment here. So your exosystem refers to social, environmental, government forces that impact you, but you don't have much control over them. And then if we go back even another layer, we're impacted by our macro system, which is going to refer to the culture in which you live. So, for example, we live in the United States. I'm assuming most of you guys are in the United States, and therefore we live in an individualistic culture, which means we tend to think more about ourselves than we do about other people, which is not necessarily a good thing, but it's part of our culture. And so if you had been raised in a different culture, and then even potentially chronosystem, if you've been raised in a different time period, you might be a very different person. Of course, we don't know, but you can assume that the culture you lived in and the time period you lived in impacted you a great deal. So we have all of these different influences that are impacting our development, not just the ones that are closest to us. And we're not just impacted by our parents, but we're impacted by our culture, by a time period, by government and laws, and by healthcare and the education system. And all of those things impact our development according to Bronfenbrenner. Alright, so there are other theories of development, and we just hit the highlights of some theories during that little section there. You can see some information here on some of the theories that we talked about, whether they are continuous or discontinuous. Do they think that development happens the same way for everyone, or is it different for different people in different environments? And it talks a little bit about nature and nurture here. So this is just kind of a summary for you to have to reference. Alright. The rest of this set of slides is going to talk primarily about research. So to give you kind of a big picture idea on research, we've already talked about a theory. A theory is something that helps us make sense of the data, make sense of the information that we've gathered. But a theory is too large and too complicated to test in any one research study. So in order to test it, we're going to have to develop a hypothesis. A hypothesis is a specific testable prediction that is consistent with our theory. So if we have a theory that being exposed to violence and violent media then produces violence in children, that's a theory. So I could have a hypothesis that if I take a group of third graders and expose them to a violent video game and then give them an opportunity to play with toys afterwards, we could have a hypothesis that children who were exposed to a violent video game would play in more violent ways than children who were exposed to a video game that was less violent. So that's a hypothesis. It's specific, it's testable, and it's consistent with our theory. So we test a hypothesis, and then we use that information to help us maybe tweak our theory, change our theory a little bit. Now, how do we actually go out and do research? How do we get the information that we need? There are lots of different ways to get information, and one thing would be observational research. So observational research has the purpose of description, and you can do observation in a couple of different ways. Naturalistic observation would refer to going into the real life setting. So we go observe someone in their home, observe someone in school, observe someone in their workplace, for example. Now, of course, you have to get permission to go into someone's home or into the school system to get permission there. That's very important. But once you have that permission, then observing someone in a real life setting is very helpful. But sometimes it's not possible. Maybe you can't get permission to go into a school system. So then perhaps we do a structured observation where we bring in the person. This could be someone that we're doing research on, so it could be a participant. But it could also be, if you're a therapist, you want to do observations on a client that you have. If you can't do it in their real world setting, then you bring someone into a lab, and maybe you try to make that lab setting as close to a real world setting as possible. The great thing about the lab is that you have some control over it. It's more structured. But of course, people might be uncomfortable in the lab, and that can change the way they react. But that's true of all types of observation. When you're watching someone, it's likely to change the way they behave. So you have to find ways to watch them that at least it impacts them as little as possible. Sometimes they say maybe you need to sit in the classroom for a few days before you start making notes, because then the kids get used to you being there and they'll stop paying attention. But we all know that we react differently when people are watching us, so you have to be aware of that when you're making observations. Other ways that you can get information, you can give people tasks to do and see how well they do tasks. So it gives an example here showing photos to measure emotion recognition accuracy. There are any number of tasks you could come up with. You can watch someone and see, are they more accurate in certain environments? Are they more accurate when they've had a good lunch versus when they're still hungry? Can they do a task better? Or maybe you're interested in, are they more accurate at certain times of the day? Or whether they've had enough sleep at night. So tasks would be one way to get information. Another way would be self-reports. A lot of what we do in psychology involves self-reports, asking people questions. This could be an interview, or it could be a survey, questionnaire. Of course, there's some information we can only get from self-report. If I ask, how do you feel about your husband or wife? You can't get that information any other way than just asking. But of course, there are problems with self-reports. People lie, or even if they're not intending to lie, sometimes people are just not very aware of themselves, and so they might give you information that's not accurate, or they might misunderstand the questions, so you have to be cautious there. We can also use physiological measures. So it talks about pupil dilation here. Are we interested in something that we're looking at, measuring how dilated your pupils are? Sometimes we might measure people's heart rate and blood pressure to see if they're feeling anxious, that kind of thing. Of course, physiological measures require someone that's been trained, someone who has the ability to use certain types of equipment. And once again, you have to get people's consent to measure that kind of thing. Now, when we're doing research, we do want to make sure that we're doing a good job, and this is where reliability and validity come in. So reliability refers to consistency. Your results are reliable if they're relatively consistent. So, for example, if I were to get on a scale, and the scale gave me a number about how much I weighed, and then I step off the scale, I get back on the scale, it tells me the same number, then my scale is reliable. If you give an intelligence test, and then later you go back and give that intelligence test again, then you would expect your results to be reliable to give a pretty similar score both times. Now, reliability is important when you're measuring something that is reliable. Something like intelligence is reliable. Something like weight is reliable, at least within a short time period. Your weight's not going to change drastically over the course of a day. However, reliability is not sufficient. It's not just about being consistent. We also have to be accurate, and that's where validity comes in. If I step on my scale and it says I weigh 1,000 pounds, this is an online class. You can't see me right now, but I don't weigh 1,000 pounds. But if I stepped on my scale and it said I weighed 1,000 pounds, and I stepped off, I step back on my scale, it says 1,000 pounds. It's reliable, but it's reliably wrong, and that's not helpful. That's misleading. So we also need something that is accurately measuring what it's supposed to be measuring, which means that an intelligence test should measure intelligence. Now, that makes sense. That seems obvious, but sometimes our intelligence tests might measure test-taking ability, or potentially reading ability. Now, reading ability is related to intelligence, but it's not the only component of intelligence. So, for it to be a valid intelligence test, it would have to measure all the important aspects of intelligence and then not measure anything else but those elements. So, we need both reliability and validity in our results. Alright. Now, we also need to find people to be in our research study. And so this is where we need to compare and contrast a population and a sample. So a population would refer to all the people that you're interested in studying. So this gives an example. Your population might be adolescent African Americans with all different socioeconomic status. Now, that could be your population. If you're doing research on relationships, then your population might be all married couples, for example. Or if you're doing research on college students, you might have a population of all students enrolled at MUW. But we can't get everyone in our population to be in our research study. We can't afford it. Usually a population is too large. We can't force people to be in our research study if they don't want to. We can't coerce them. So if we can't get everyone in our population, then we take a sample. A sample would be a subset of the population that's actually going to participate in our research study. Now, I'm not sure exactly what happened with the wording here. Chosen to well represent. I suppose we do want people to represent well. It just feels like it's a little bit confusing. Maybe I just haven't had enough caffeine today. But the idea here is that you want your sample to represent your population, so you want to have a representative sample. The best way to get a representative sample is to randomly select a large sample. So for example, if your population has 20,000 people in it, then you're going to need a pretty large sample, as large as you can get. You can't have a population with 20,000 people and then think that a sample of 30 people is going to be sufficient to give you some kind of information about your population. It needs to be large, and it needs to be randomly chosen. Let's say, for example, that you were doing research on college students. If you chose all freshmen to be in your research study, that does not represent your population of all college students. You need college students that are freshmen, sophomore, junior, senior. You might need some students that are grad students, depending on if it's a university that has grad students. And you want to make sure that you have the right balance of male versus female students. You want to make sure that you have different majors that are included, different socioeconomic status, because you want your sample to look like your population. And that way your results will then tell you something not just about your sample, but about your population as well. All right. Now, another way to do research would be to do correlational research. So observational research had the purpose of description. Correlational research has the purpose of prediction. So you measure two variables and look to see if there's a relationship between them. So one example of this could be if we measure class attendance and grades. So those are two naturally occurring variables. I'm not manipulating them at all. I'm just going to measure your class attendance and measure your grade and look to see if there's a relationship between them. Now, if I were to find a relationship there, that allows me to make a prediction. If I know your class attendance, I can predict your grade. And if I know your grade, I can predict your class attendance. But that's all you can do with correlation. It does not prove causation. And more on that later. But what that means is that I can't say that your class attendance was the reason why your grade was what it was, or that your grade caused your class attendance. All I can say is that they're related to each other. Now, when we're talking about correlations, there are a couple of important things to understand. First of all, the direction of a correlation. So you'll see a negative sign here and a positive sign here. A positive correlation means that two variables are moving in the same direction. So as one goes up, the other goes up. One goes down, the other goes down. So as class attendance goes up, grades go up. Class attendance goes down, grades go down. Donuts goes up, weight goes up. Donuts go down, weight goes down, right? They're positively correlated. Now, a negative correlation means that as one goes up, the other goes down, or as one goes down, the other goes up. So perhaps as sleep goes down, stress goes up. Sleep goes up, stress goes down. So they're moving in opposite directions. That's a negative correlation. So the direction tells you, are they moving together, or are they moving in opposite directions? We also need to understand the magnitude or the strength, because if we have two variables that are not really that closely related to each other, then our prediction won't be very good. But if we have a strong correlation, a correlation of a high magnitude, then our prediction will be much better. So we have a number here, and R is what we're going to use as the symbol for a correlational coefficient. It's just a number that tells us the strength of the correlation. That strength can be anywhere between 0 to 1. And the higher the number, the stronger the correlation. So a correlation of 0 means absolutely no correlation. These two variables don't go together at all. And it's very rare to find a correlation of 0. Usually two variables are at least somewhat related to each other. A correlation of 1.00 is a perfect correlation, meaning that they always go together the same way every time. And this is pretty rare too. We don't usually find perfect correlations or correlations of 0. Usually the correlations are somewhere in between. So, for example, you might have a correlation of 0.8. A correlation of 0.8, it's a pretty strong correlation. It's pretty close to 1. So a correlation of 0.8 is stronger than a correlation of 0.6, for example. The higher the number, or the closer the number is to 1, the stronger the correlation, the better the prediction. One thing to note here is that the direction does not impact the strength. So I said that we have positive correlations that move together, we have negative correlations that move in opposite directions, but this does not impact the strength. So for example, a negative 0.5 correlation has the same strength as a positive 0.5 correlation. The strength is determined by the number. The direction is important. It tells you whether they're moving together or in opposite directions, but it doesn't tell you anything about the strength. Now, there's a lot of information in today's lecture that may be a review for you, or maybe the first time you've heard this information. Please feel free to send me an email if you have questions. All right. Now, we said that correlations just look at a relationship between two naturally occurring variables. It does not allow us to determine causation. And then we have an example here. Let's suppose that we found a correlation between intelligence and social support. So we find that as intelligence goes up, the number of friends goes up. Intelligence goes down, friends go down. That's a positive correlation. Now, there are several different potential interpretations of that. You could say, well, being intelligent causes you to have more friends. And that could be true. It could be that someone who is intelligent is a more attractive friend. But it could also be that having more friends makes you more intelligent. Like you learn things from spending time around other people. Or it could be that there's a third variable that causes both. So there could be a type of parenting that you receive that leads to children being more intelligent, as well as children having better social skills and then therefore having more friends. The classic example here is about ice cream sales and violent crime. So there's a strong positive correlation between ice cream sales and violent crime. As ice cream sales go up, violent crime goes up. Well, how do we explain that? Well, it's possible, I suppose, that the ice cream sales cause the violent crime, or the violent crime caused the ice cream sales. Like I'm munchy after that. But it's also possible that there's a third variable that causes both. And this is usually where I make my PMS joke, which I'm allowed to make because I'm a woman, right, causing violent crime and ice cream sales, but no. But usually we blame the third variable as heat. So during the summer, people are more likely to buy ice cream. Also, during the summer, people are more uncomfortable and therefore more likely to be aggressive. The purpose of this information is that when you see a correlation, it allows you to make a prediction, but it does not allow you to determine causation. But of course, we do want to understand causation. We go into psychology to be able to ask and answer the question, why? Why do things happen? But in order to know that, we have to do an experiment. So observational research has the purpose of description, correlational research has the purpose of prediction, experimental research has the purpose of determining causation, helping us to understand why, cause and effect. So the best way I think to illustrate some of these terms would be just to have some examples. So let's say that we're interested in the effect of study skills training on college students. So my population might be all college students. I can't get all college students to be in my study though, so I choose a sample, hopefully a sample that represents my population well. Now, the traditional, simple type of experiment would be that once you have your sample, then you're going to randomly assign them into two groups. The experimental group will get your new treatment. In this case, it would be a study skills training seminar. The control group would get nothing, or some other kind of information given to them. Now, the independent variable is the variable that the researcher manipulates. In that example, what we're manipulating is the type of training you receive. The experimental group is going to get the actual training, the control group is going to get nothing or some other kind of training. The independent variable is what the researchers manipulate. The dependent variable is your outcome. It's what you're measuring. So in that particular study, we might be interested in GPA, for example. We might say that students who receive the study skills training, we would expect their GPA to be higher. So you manipulate the independent variable and you measure the dependent variable. So basically what you want to say is my independent variable impacting my dependent variable? Another quick example here, we could be doing research on a new treatment for depression. So then we would say my population would be all people who meet criteria for depression. We can't get all of them to be in our research study, so we're going to take a sample. We're going to randomly assign our sample into two groups. One group, the experimental group, gets our new treatment. The other group, the control group, gets no treatment or a placebo, a fake treatment. And then we're going to measure their symptoms of depression. So in this case, the independent variable, the thing that we manipulate, would be the type of treatment that you receive, whether you get the real treatment or fake treatment. The dependent variable, what we're measuring, would be your symptoms of depression. And we might have a hypothesis that the individuals who are exposed to the real treatment would see better outcomes. They'd have fewer symptoms of depression at the end of the study than the people who receive the fake treatment or no treatment at all. Okay. Now, a lot of information today. As I said, let me know if you have any questions. What about the time period of our research? So we have longitudinal research versus cross-sectional research. This is basically the question, are we going to study the same group of people over time, or are we going to get lots of different people and during one time period? This is especially important for development. So longitudinal studies follow the same individual or groups of individuals across a long time period. So sometimes longitudinal research can last 5, 10, 20 years where we follow the same people. Now, a great thing about longitudinal research is that it allows you, since you're following the same people, to see how they change throughout the lifespan. So, for example, if I was interested in the difference between second graders and 10th graders, I would go out and get a sample of second graders and measure whatever the skill is or the thing that I'm interested in. And then I would go back and check in with them every so often and then see how they change over time. And then when they're 10th graders, I'm going to measure them again. And we have the exact same people when they're in second grade as we do when they're in 10th grade. So the great thing here is we get to see how the same people change over time. But this is expensive because we're going to have to be doing the same research study for 10 years. The thing we have going on right now is we have this publish or perish mentality that professors are expected to put out new publications pretty frequently, and we feel like that's important for maybe whether we keep our job, whether we get promotions, tenure, that kind of thing. And so we're not used to seeing people spend years and years working on the same research study and only getting one publication out of it. So on the practical side, this is very difficult to do. Also, if you're following the same people over years, some people are going to drop out. They'll refuse to participate later on, or they'll move, you'll lose contact with them. So you're going to have to start off with a pretty large sample size. So another way that you can do this, in a less expensive, more time-effective way, would be to do your research at one point in time with people who are of different ages. So I can go in one day, I can measure second graders and measure 10th graders and compare them. Now, of course, the people who are in second grade are not the same people as those who are in 10th grade because we're doing it on the same day. And I can make an argument that some things are just human nature, and so it's very likely that my second graders will end up being similar to these 10th graders. That's an argument you can make, but it still doesn't allow you to follow the same people over time. So you lose some power there, but of course there's an advantage that you don't have to spend years doing the same research study. So the thing about longitudinal research is that it's usually easy to publish because not many people are doing it. If you're doing a good job with it, you shouldn't have a problem publishing it. But once again, not everyone is able to spend years and years doing the same research study. Alright, now, what if a topic has been studied by lots of different people? Is there a way to combine their results together to give us kind of a big picture idea of what they're actually finding? Yes, we can do a meta-analysis. So it says that this is an analysis of multiple studies that are all looking at the same research question. So, for example, if we're looking at the outcomes related to different types of parenting, then we could say, okay, well, there's several different researchers that have looked at authoritative parenting versus permissive parenting, for example. More on those actual terms later in the class. That'll come back up. But let's say that we're interested in that. There are several different research studies that have been published with that. We can take them and combine all their results together. So then this would allow us to see if the results have been replicated. Are all these different studies finding the same or very similar outcomes? So a meta-analysis is a statistical technique that kind of combines different research studies. Now, the caveat here is that if you're going to do this, you need to find research studies that have been done in very similar ways. If they were done in very different ways, then you can't really put them together as if they were done in very similar ways. So sometimes it's difficult to find enough research studies that have similarities so that you can do this. But it does give a lot of power to be able to read maybe one paper, one meta-analysis, and actually find out results that are combined from several different research studies. It can be very, very interesting. Alright, how do you communicate your research results? So we do our research, whether that be correlational or experimental or observational, and then we're going to publish our research so we can get it out there. Now, not every research study that is conducted ends up being published. And sometimes you have a result where you submit a paper and they say, well, we will publish it as long as you make certain edits. So the publishing time, it varies from one journal to the next and from one study to the next, but it can take a very long time to find a home for a research article. You may have to submit it to several different journals before it's actually published. Now, in order to be published, theoretically, it should be well done, it should meet certain criteria, and that's why it's going to be peer-reviewed. So when you submit a potential article, then they're going to send it out to different people who are experts in that field. So if it's a study on parenting, then they're going to have experts on parenting read your paper and decide, did this person do a good job? Is this useful? Is it original? So is this person plagiarizing, which is very important to know. And then if they feel like this is important research, then it will be published. Now, theoretically, this should be keeping research out of journals unless it is high quality. Unfortunately, sometimes there are journals that do publish information that's not high quality, or there are journals perhaps that every once in a while something accidentally sneaks through. So you should still be critical of the research that you consume, even if it's published. But theoretically, it's supposed to go through a process to kind of keep out that subpar quality research. Alright, now last couple of things on this set of slides before we briefly jump into prenatal development today. When you're doing research, you have to think about the rights of your participants. So as the researcher, you have people looking over your shoulder, making sure that you're doing a good job. So we have like an institutional review board where we have to submit exactly what we're planning on doing to make sure that our research is ethical. But you have some extra things to think about when you're working with children. So in general, all people who do research, they're participants of the research, they have a right to protection from harm, privacy, so I'm going to come back to informed consent in a second, privacy, so you keep their results confidential, their information confidential. They should have a right to know about the overall results of the study. They should have a right to receive beneficial treatments and to have their needs taken into consideration. But also, informed consent is a very important right. And this is one that's different a little bit for children. So informed consent means that you understand everything that's happening to you and you have agreed to participate in the research study. So when you go do a research study, they'll have an informed consent form that you have to read first and sign, and it gives you information about exactly what's going to happen, about how this benefits you, how it benefits other people, any potential harm that could be associated with the research study. And also, it should give you information on how to contact someone if you have questions. So there should be contact information for a supervisor in case you're wondering why something happened, what happened, if you want to make a complaint. But in addition to that, people have the right to leave a research study at any particular time without being detained or being harmed in any way. This doesn't necessarily mean you get your class credit or you get paid for it. You might not get that, but you do have a right to leave. However, who gives informed consent? Well, theoretically, the participant does if they are able to give informed consent. So the way it's set up is that if you're over the age of 18, or if you're younger but emancipated legally, then you are your own guardian. Unless you have some kind of health problem, psychological problem, or whatever, where you're not able to give informed consent, in that case a guardian would. But for the most part, if you're 18 or older, you give your own informed consent, which means that children then do not give their own informed consent. A parent would be signing those consent forms. Now, legally, all you need is informed consent. If you have a parent sign a form that says, yes, my child can participate in this research study, then you can go forward whether the child agrees to or not, legally. But assent is an important issue here. So assent is where you ask the person, are you willing to participate, if they're not the person giving informed consent. So if you're a 20-year-old doing a research study, then you sign your own informed consent form. That's you giving your assent. I understand what's going on, and I'm going to participate. But if you're an 8-year-old and your parents are the ones signing the informed consent, then legally you don't have a right to say that you won't participate. But assent asks the question, do you still want to participate? And although it's not necessary, it is a good idea to have children be on board, to have someone, even if they're not legally giving consent, to say, yeah, I do agree, I do want to do this. However, there may be times where a parent says they want this done to the child, and the child says no, and you might decide to go forward with that treatment anyway. And that actually plays into your first activity. Now, remember that for activities, they need to be at least 200 words long. You're going to be submitting these through Canvas. And all I'm asking you to think about here is, would you agree to go forward even if the child does not give their assent? In this particular example here, imagine that you're conducting a research study on an experimental treatment. So this is not a well-established treatment. It's an experimental treatment for a life-threatening illness. The parent has given informed consent, and legally that's all that you need to move forward, but the child has not given assent. In other words, the child says, no, I don't want to do this. What would you do? And what factors would influence your decision? Do you think you would move forward, or would you not? Maybe you're thinking about the type of illness. Maybe you're thinking about the age or the maturity level of the child. So I'm asking you to think critically here about when you would give priority to parental consent, or when you might give priority to the assent of the person who's actually receiving the treatment. In this case, it would be a child. So this is your opinion, but I want you to think critically about it and then give me at least 200 words on this topic. Okay, now that's all for that set of slides, but during today's lecture video we are also very briefly going to start the slides on prenatal development. So the first set of slides was introduction, we had some theory, we had some research, but this is where we're really going to start the development process. So we are going to go from conception all the way to death. and we're going to cover the entire lifespan this semester. So we're going to start off a little bit of information today about prenatal development, which we'll continue on during the next lecture video. So here we go. First of all, a little bit here on genetics and heredity. So we're not going to go into any great detail here about genetics, but basically speaking, every person has 23 pairs of chromosomes. Pair, we have 2. So we have 46 total chromosomes. 23 pairs, you have 46 chromosomes. Your chromosomes are your genetic material. You're going to get half of those from mom and half of those from dad. So the egg that you receive from your mother has 23 chromosomes, which are half of your mom's 46. Your dad has 46 chromosomes, and a sperm is going to contain 23 of those. So a person is going to have 46 chromosomes, which is 23 pairs. An egg has 23, sperm has 23. So when you combine those together, you get 46. And those 46 chromosomes are going to be half of your mom's and half of your dad's chromosomes. They come together to create this entirely new mix, this entirely new shuffle. And so it talks about this is as if you're shuffling 2 different hands of cards together. This is how you can have children who have the same biological mom and the same biological dad, but may not look that similar to each other because you receive a different combination, a different mix of chromosomes. I have one child who has blue eyes and red hair, and she's my only red-haired child. I'm still waiting to see what color eyes my youngest is going to end up with, because they can change at a certain point. But I only have one redhead in my family, right? But your appearance and other things are determined by your genetics in a large part. But you're going to have a combination of genetics from mom, genetics from dad. Okay, so you have 23 chromosomes in an egg, 23 in a sperm. They come together to get 46. So you have 23 pairs, 46 total, right? Now, your chromosomes are going to contain your genes. They're going to have your genetic material that is going to play a large part in your development. So we're going to see this coming up, but your genetics can impact how you look. Your genetics can impact your intelligence, personality, skills that you have. But of course, your genetics don't make up every aspect of who you are, only certain aspects of who you are. A lot of times we have a combination of your environment with your genetics that ends up determining exactly who you turn out to be. Now, we said that you have 23 pairs of chromosomes, which means 46 total, 23 pairs. The first 22 pairs are referred to as autosomes, and then your last pair, that 23rd pair, is what's going to determine a child's sex here. Now, sex is something that's going to be determined by the father. So, a male will have XY chromosomes. So they'll have a pair here. We have X from mom, Y from dad. Female is going to have XX chromosomes, X from mom, and X from dad. So women only have X chromosomes. So that's all they can give. So if you're a mom who has a son, you gave an X. If you're a mom who has a daughter, you gave an X. All you have is an X. You don't have a Y to give. So sex here is something that is determined by the father. A father has an X and a Y. So mom gives an X, dad gives an X, you end up with a daughter. Mom gives an X, dad gives a Y, you end up with a son. Now, this is something we kind of historically think about, maybe Henry VIII, right? We have someone who was very upset, very angry that his plethora of wives kept producing daughters and didn't produce sons and didn't have heirs. And so we blame the wives and we behead the wives, but it's actually dads who determine biologically, it's not like you can choose, but biologically determine whether we're having a son or a daughter. So what we see here then is that sex is determined by the father. Now, one thing to note is that with women having XX chromosomes, they have a little bit more genetic material than males do. So XY, there's not as much genetic material here. Males are a little bit more susceptible to certain disorders, a little bit less likely to survive, and potentially that is because of having less genetic material. But more on that later. Alright, so each chromosome is made up of DNA, Now, you've probably heard of DNA. When we talk about DNA, it's deoxyribonucleic acid. That's what that stands for. But DNA is your instructional code for the production of things that you need, amino acids, proteins, and enzymes here. Now, probably where you hear DNA would be on all the daytime talk shows where you hear people doing DNA testing to see is this the person, the father, or not. But the DNA makes up who you are. It talks about genes being a group of DNA that has specific instructions for creating something in particular. And so your genetics are set from that moment of conception when there's a combination of the 23 chromosomes from dad, 23 chromosomes from mom. You have a unique set of genetics there based on that, and from that moment of conception a lot of things are determined, and so certain health risks, both maybe medical or psychological issues, as we've already said, appearances, abilities, a lot of those things are greatly set at that moment of conception based on the genetics that someone receives. And when we're talking about nature versus nurture here, nature would refer to your genetics, right? And nurture would refer to your environment. So when we're talking about a person's genetics, a genotype refers to the genes that you have inherited. A genotype only takes into account nature. We're looking at the genes that a person has. But of course, your genetics do not determine everything. Certainly your environment plays a role as well. If your genes determined everything, there really wouldn't be much hope here, would there? A person would have a certain predisposition towards some great traits, then fantastic, you're good to go. But if a person has a predisposition towards some undesirable traits, if it was all about nature, there'd be no hope for that person. So fortunately, then in that case, we see that the environment does play a role. So a phenotype would be the actual expression of your traits. So it's not just about who you genetically are. Who you end up being also is an influence between your genetic makeup and your environment. That's a combination here. For example, you might have received genetics towards being athletic, but if you're not ever given an opportunity to play sports, then you might never know, you might never develop that ability because your environment didn't allow for it. Let's say that there's a person perhaps and their genes make them very intelligent, but they don't have access to books, they don't have access to information. They may never receive or reach their full potential because their environment didn't allow them to fully express those traits. So a phenotype would be who you actually end up being. It's what we're able to see. Not what we see on a piece of paper that has your genetic testing on it, but who you actually are. And it is a combination of the genetics you receive as well as the environment. One way that we see this might be people who are attractive. So research suggests that people who are physically attractive also tend to have better social skills. Well, perhaps your genetics might have determined the way you look in a large part, but it's not the same as saying, well, this person is attractive and those genetics that made them attractive also gave them good social skills. No, there's a phenotype here. The environment that you live in when you're an attractive person is different than the environment that you live in when you're not an attractive person. So people might be kinder to you, people might treat you differently, and then that might lead to you having better social skills. So your genetics certainly play a role, but the environment that you're in also impacts who you end up being, who we actually end up seeing, which is a combination of physical traits that could be determined by your genetics, but also your environment. Think about someone who has a very poor diet. So perhaps your genetics might have given you a predisposition towards having a very healthy body, but if someone then is malnourished, so something from the environment could then impact how well they actually develop in the end. So it's a combination of your environment impacting your physical, behavioral, and psychological development. Now, when we're studying development, something that we often do is study twins, because this helps us have a unique look at nature versus nurture. So in order to talk about that, we have to understand the different types of twins. So we can have dizygotic or fraternal twins, or monozygotic or identical twins. Now, with dizygotic or fraternal twins, we have 2 eggs, 2 sperm that just happen to be fertilized and in the womb at the same time, but they're no more genetically alike than any other sibling pair, which means we could have 2 boys, we could have 2 girls, we could have a boy and a girl. So this would be just like any other sibling pair. They would share 50% of their genetics. They just happen to be in the womb at the same time. On the other hand, monozygotic or identical twins happen when you have 1 egg and 1 sperm that then splits into 2. And so they are essentially, not 100%, but almost genetically identical. So what we'd be interested in then is, would we find that identical twins are more similar to each other than fraternal twins? Because they would be genetically more similar to each other. So if we found that, for example, intelligence was very similar in identical twins, then that would give us some evidence to suggest that their genetics played a role, because they had the same genetics and they had the same outcomes. And there certainly are a lot of outcomes, intelligence, psychological outcomes, personality, that kind of thing, where we do find more similarities among identical twins than we do fraternal twins. But one thing about twins is that whether they are fraternal or identical, they often have a shared environmental component that then can make things a little bit more complicated. They're born at the same time, so their parents are at the same stage of life, same level of income. They probably grew up around the same age peers, maybe went to the same school, they were in the same class, they had the same teachers, so they're likely to have some shared environment. So then if we have twins that have the same environment and the same genetics, how do we know if their outcomes were based on environment or genetics? Well, one way they would study that would be twins that are separated. So sometimes they'll do research on identical twins that are separated at birth. Of course, that's not a large population, so we can't necessarily generalize, but there's a lot of interesting research out there. We see sometimes that twins that are separated at birth, who have never met each other, have very similar outcomes, and that would suggest that even though they were raised in different environments, the similarities in genetics cause them to be similar to each other. That gives us evidence for nature, for genetics, right? So, one thing to note here, though, is that your genetics do not entirely determine who you end up being. Definitely your environment plays a role. If your genetics were the only thing that played a role, then you and your siblings would all be very similar to each other, because you all have at least a certain amount of genetics that overlap. What we find, though, is that even people who are full biological twins or full identical twins might have some differences in their personalities, because they might have different environments, perhaps. Maybe they're around different people, they have different friends. You probably have siblings, if you have siblings, that are very different from you. Even though they may be raised in the same household, had the same biological parents, it's because they have different environmental influences here. So, I talked about people who are attractive. People who are attractive are treated differently by other people, and therefore that can impact who they become. Imagine if a person has a genetic predisposition towards being athletic. Well, being athletic might then cause other people to treat them differently, maybe do special favors for them, want to be their friends because they're a very good athlete. So your genes might then impact the way that people treat you, which then a combination of those things together determines who you truly are. So even within a family member, you might have a sibling, even maybe a sibling that you're close to in age, maybe a year or two apart, that has a very different personality. And you wonder, how does this happen? Because we have the same biological parents and we grew up around the same time period. Well, that's true, but you do have a little bit different environment. Maybe you were exposed to different friends, you had different teachers. Also, sometimes we receive different parenting, even if we have the same parents. Sometimes we parent our daughters differently than we parent our sons, or we parent our older children differently than we parent our younger children. So the take-home message from this information is that it's a combination of your genetic material and the environment that you grew up in that ultimately dictates who you become. Alright, I think that'll be be a good stopping place for today. We will spend the majority of our next lecture carrying on with prenatal development. So we've kind of set the stage here with some genetic inheritance. We'll actually start talking about what's going on in the womb during our next lecture video. So let me know if you have any questions. I know there was a lot of information today. You do have your first activity that's going to be due by Friday at 5 p.m. So let me know if you need anything as you're working on that. Otherwise, I will talk to you guys during the next lecture video. Have a great day.